everyone, this is Michael here with Engearment. I recently had a conversation with Drew Petersen. If you're not familiar with Drew, he is a pro skier who in the past few years has become a very public advocate for mental health in mountain communities. He's made a couple of films about this and most recently released one called Feel It All, which is now streaming on YouTube, so hope you can check that out. We had a conversation around the film, around his recent run of the Leadville 100 and his reasoning for running that race as well as for releasing the film. The goal of the film, Feel It All, is to create change around the conversation about mental health and to bring more awareness to a topic that is often not talked about or is very uncomfortable for people to talk about. So I hope you get to check out the film. Drew is also hosting quite a few events in Colorado, Montana, and some other mountain communities in the upcoming weeks. He has that full schedule up on his Instagram, so if you're in the area for one of them, I hope you can get to one of those events. You can also pick up one of these hats to share the message on Drew's website. So check out Feel It All, and thanks for watching this interview with Drew. I am here today talking with Drew Petersen, who recently finished running the Leadville 100, an incredible 100-mile race over the mountains here in Colorado, not too far from here. He's also a pro skier and a very public advocate for mental health, especially in the outdoor community. And would love to talk more about his new film, as well as some of his other passions and activities like the Leadville 100. So Drew, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks, Michael. Stoked to chat.
Recently, you said how people would define you as a skier, and I saw that, communicated in the film, but you're also a runner. And now, since talking more publicly about public health, or about mental health with the public and your journey with that, how would you, we hear people say the first time they talk to someone, what do you do for a living? And people are maybe defined more so by their passions than their careers. How would you want to see people define you, or how do you define yourself now as a public advocate for mental health?
Yeah, it's kind of it's a fitting question because it was this conversation around identity was and is obviously a part of my story and was part of the filmmaking process too, of how much do we pull in regards to that question of identity. And we, there's only so many things that you can fit in a 34-minute film. And so we don't get like too deep into the identity question and Feel It All. But I think through that process and just through these recent few years of my life, kind of a renaissance of my life, professionally, athletically, personally, I would way rather be defined or identify with what I care about and what my actions build towards than simply like what I do for a living or anything. So I think, not having a canned answer for it, I'd say I am a very passionate human being in a deep relationship with myself, with my community, with the mountains and the natural world, and committed to a path of self-discovery and personal growth. The answer that would be way quicker to give to a stranger at a coffee shop would be that I do a lot of different things. I'm a professional skier. That's kind of my day job. And then on top of that, I'm also a public speaker, a passionate ultra runner, filmmaker. I do a lot of different things, produce events, produce films, try to create places for people to connect.
Well, I definitely want to talk more about the most recent film that you released, but most recently you just finished running the Leadville 100, and that's a huge, huge race. Over the past couple of weeks, I'm sure recovery time and all of that, but it's not the first time that you've run this race. And, in that film, you talk about the inspiration behind why you wanted to run that race, and getting to that was obviously incredibly powerful, but having now completed this
seemingly to many of us impossible feat of running that distance. What can you tell us about your experience from that recently?
Yeah, man. So this year, 2024 Leadville 100 was my third Leadville and my fourth 100-miler. And I think it's different every time and it's unique every time. I think that was certainly true in this race. But when I go around 100 miles, my goal and intention and what I find within that is an opportunity to live the full spectrum of the human experience with maximum vibrance, we'll say. And I definitely got that. I think this year's race was, it was a lot of different things, which is what 100 miles will become. There's a lot of time and a lot of processing out there for it to become a lot of different things. And in some ways it was kind of a celebration and maybe somewhat of a punctuation point. Don't know if that's a period or a semicolon or what, for kind of this chapter around like my focus on Leadville and focus on creating Feel It All, and then kind of tried to turn it into a celebration of getting this film out in the world and connecting and helping our community at large. So I think it was all those things. It was also really fucking hard and it was really slow.
So did you get the big belt buckle or the belt buckle?
I got the belt buckle, which actually I have it right here. It's so this is the one I won this year. That's a stretch, under 30 hours, and it's kind of comical how small that is compared to the big under 25 hour belt buckle. Frankly, like I don't run professionally, so I think that takes a little bit of the pressure off, but
Sure.
I still expect a lot of myself. And this race did not go well performance wise. It was pretty ugly, but that's what it ended up being, and just tried to embrace it, and it ended up being a slog to get it done, but never had any semblance of doubt that I was going to finish, even if it was just a really long, slow one.
Gosh, well, I mean, from what I saw on your social media feed, it looked like you had a lot of great support behind you, still people running with you at certain segments. And I imagine too, it seems in the weeks following, like you've definitely gotten a big outpouring of support around the film. Why do you think that so many people and brands are getting behind your message of making mental health more easy to talk about in mountain communities?
I think ultimately it's just people see themselves in me. I think that's the point of what I'm doing, is that my story is the story of our community, and that's why I make these films, and that's why I share myself publicly, so that other people feel less alone, and like they're just as much a part of what I'm doing as I am as a result. The evolution for me too, like running wise, is like to go run 100 miles, like you have to have a very like deep and pure motivation, or at least I believe and intend to. And so in Feel It All, I'm sure we'll get more into it, but in Feel It All, like the core goal and like really like guiding force in that story was that when I was struggling and at my worst, and when I was going through the scariest suicidal episodes of my life, I used to tell myself, if I can make it through this, if I can survive today to see tomorrow, then I can do absolutely anything. I can climb any mountain, I can ski any line, and I can run 100 miles. And the third of those, being the most tangible of the three, running 100 miles, really became a lifeline for me. And that was like my very deep inner volition and my why for going to run 100. And that's definitely still within me, and I still felt it out there, you know, when I was running Leadville this year. But it's like I've grown and evolved, and my why has grown and evolved too. And now when I'm running hundreds, I'm running for everyone else. I'm running for my community. I'm running for everyone who's ever struggled with depression or mental health, struggled with suicidal thoughts, and I run for those who aren't here as well. To the people, I run for the people who we've lost to death by suicide, and their loved ones and their families and their friends who carry that now. And that's a very it's quite remarkable for me to evolve that why, because obviously that lifeline of a goal of running 100 miles was very deep and pure and powerful. And now running it for other people, running it for our community is like infinitely more powerful, and there's like an infinite well of strength that I can draw on, because I think about the strength of all those people when I'm out there. And so, you know, whether people have heard me say that that's my why and why I do it now, or if they haven't heard that, I think they see that and feel that in me when they connect with me and connect with my story. So I think that's why I have so much support, you know, when I'm out there, and I feel it. I really do feel all that support. So a lot of gratitude and thanks to everybody who was cheering me on and sending me energy from afar, and obviously the people who were helping me actually in person too.
No, Drew, that's awesome. And I can just hear it in your voice right now. And one thing that I've noticed, I think, or I found, is like the strength of the message that you have is because you're so vulnerable about what's generally considered, I think oftentimes a tough topic for people to talk about. And you've opened up even more about it since a couple years ago, your last film that came out, Ups and Downs. What inspired you since then to make Feel It All, since creating Ups and Downs and sharing that?
Yeah, there's a lot underlying in there, and it's been kind of cool with releasing the film and kind of this like culmination of like 2.5 years of work on Feel It All to maybe unpack and understand the motivation to make it a little bit better. And it comes from a few different places. Is like when I made Ups and Downs, my prior film, that was truly a first of its kind film in the ski world. And it would have been impossible for me to ever predict or comprehend like the impact that would have or the people it would reach. And like I don't use the word incredible because it is credible, because I know how real like the mental health and suicide crisis is in our communities. But I was definitely like floored by that, you know, impact. And then I realized, like, when I made Ups and Downs, it was ultimately I had this like deep volition of I need to share this story to help people, but there wasn't much like strategy or intention around how to do so, or the like strategy for impact. And I knew that if I made another film with more intention, that I could grow that impact. And so that was like the kind of like root of why I decided to make another film. And then on a more lighthearted note, like I've always wanted to make a ski run combo film, and this just felt like the perfect opportunity to do so. And that it was a pure story with, you know, with a mission driven approach. And then on top of that, like the Sawatch and Leadville are like I have a lifelong connection and a deep sense of home there. So it's kind of perfect.
There was a lot about that in the film.
See that through. Yeah. And then, you know, I was having dinner with a buddy a few nights ago, and I was talking with him about the film, and he's let's just say he's on a similar wavelength to me in life. And so he took things out of the film that I was hoping people would find, and I was like really honored that he found those. And like there's Easter eggs in this film that like I had to create another film to be able to share those. And like if you know, when you go watch the film, I think whatever resonates with you, know that there is intention behind creating the film so that we could share that little nugget in a way that, you know, would get people thinking or strike a chord in people's hearts. So yeah, all that's to say, just a lot of different motivations that I had to have that many motivations to see through such a big project for so damn long.
Well, you know, one thing I was going to mention is, and it sounds like perhaps your friend did in some ways, but sharing something like this, I'm sure is going to inspire others to want to share perhaps their story with you. And I wonder if there have been stories that you've heard from others from these films that you've released, or since releasing Feel It All a couple of weeks ago, stories that people have opened up to share with you that have inspired you in return.
Oh yeah. I mean, frankly, it's limitless. And like that's the goal, you know. Vulnerability begets vulnerability, and for anyone to be vulnerable, there needs to be space, and there needs to be a safe space for them to be vulnerable. The difficulty within that is that somebody has to create that space first. There has to be like somebody taking that first step, and that's you know, what I try to do, and that's what I try to use these films for. And the space that opens for other people to be vulnerable is infinitely inspirational for me too. And it's pretty neat, like the range of things in that regard. Like there are friends who I've known like most of our lives who end up sharing with me, you know, a side of themselves that I never knew existed, even though maybe I knew them for 2 decades or something. And then there's complete strangers who share really powerful stories with me. And in like this day and age, a lot of that connection comes digitally, but I really put a large emphasis on in-person events and trying to create in-person real life human connection. And those are the connections and stories and people who like inspire me the most. And those are the people who their strength is what I'm leaning on when I'm out there running.
You know, I mentioned to you just earlier, I've now watched the film a couple of times, and I mean, within the first minute, you can just see how meaningful and challenging this type of a message can be to open up and share about. There was one scene in particular that stood out to me, and if it's all right, if I could ask you about, because it was, I think there's sometimes this, well, you were at the top of this cliff in the middle of the night, and you were just so scared, and at the same time then you just decided to run back down. But in the photo, and then when you talked about your childhood, you were looking at all these photos of what seemed to be such a happy kid and a happy person, and I teared up watching that part. But you said how there was so much more lying underneath. What would you say to someone who perhaps wants to open up in ways about these things that they're hiding? How would you suggest they go about seeking that help, and what since opening up about this so publicly has changed for you from that?
Yeah. Oh man. There's definitely a lot to unpack there. What that makes me think though is like the process of storytelling, the process of filmmaking is a pretty amazing opportunity for me as well to like unpack and understand all these different elements and all these different sides of my story. And like in doing so, it has kind of like worked in concert or been like kind of a follow-up to a lot of the deep work that I've done in therapy to unpack some of those different elements. And as a result, similar to through therapy, through storytelling, I've like found these memories that my brain had like locked away in a filing cabinet to protect myself from them. And so like in the film, when I shared like that experience of standing atop Lone Peak and in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah and thinking about jumping off the cliffs, like that is one that is like one instance of a suicidal thought that was followed quite literally by thousands more. And then that was one instance of a memory that my brain had tried to block out and tried to block that pain from myself. As far as like what it's like to share, you know, that stuff publicly and what kind of like impact that has on maybe the same like process or unpacking that I'm speaking to, I think more than anything, it's just like it just feels like I'm not hiding, you know, in the same way that I'm not hiding those things from myself, by being able to unpack those elements of who I am and what my experiences have been. Like I feel like I'm not hiding like a huge part of my experience, you know, not just publicly, but from the people in my life too. And sharing publicly has made that a lot easier. There's a lot more, I guess, to be said about that public vulnerability, because it's not just like a blanket, like, oh yeah, it's like, it's good, it's helpful, it's difficult. But yeah, I just get to have that like confidence rooted in knowing that I'm just being myself and that I'm not hiding from myself or from the world.
Yeah. Wow. And I know you're now living back in your home. So you get to share that sort of thing even more, I imagine, with lifelong family and friends. And have that support network around you. If I recall, you were in California for a while and now back in Colorado, but being surrounded by family and friends, has that made it, I suppose, easier for you? Yeah, I had a different question I wanted to ask around this, but just seeing, hearing you say how it did make it easier with your family as well and close friends that you've been able to open up to more. When you want to open up about some things, the hardest people to open up to might be the ones closest to you. And I just wonder what that has felt like now, being surrounded by your family. I mean, the last time when I saw you earlier this spring, you were out skiing with your dad, and like you have your family there to ski with, and your family there to support you. I suppose what I might ask is, in trying to help others through this journey, what What would you suggest to someone that maybe doesn't have that same type of support network, or feels alone in feels more alone in wanting to open up about the help that they need?
Yeah. Oh man. You know, I like for me, being home and having more of a sense of home than I've had in a very long time is very helpful to just my own well-being and general life. Um, uh, yeah, I kind of lived all over the West, a lot of time in Salt Lake City, a few years in Tahoe, and then last summer I came back home for I called it altitude training for Leadville. But pretty instantaneously, I just felt like the most myself and like the most at peace that I'd been in a long time. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to listen to that. I have the freedom and flexibility in my life to decide where I want to live. And I'm going to listen to that and, try to lean into that peace and sense of place. So it's really good to feel that overall. And I think that gives me like a general, like, calm, like, baseline to exist on right now, which is really awesome and definitely needed for everything that I'm doing personally, professionally, publicly, privately. And as far as like what that's like, dynamic wise, family, friends, building community, and like this will connect directly to kind of some advice for people who are looking for genuine connection and support within their networks too. Is I think of vulnerability in 4 different spheres. And so the 4th sphere is the farthest out. It's public vulnerability. That's what I'm doing. That's putting it out literally publicly, whether that be on the internet, in person, with strangers, people you've never met before. And then the 3rd sphere of vulnerability is with your community. It's the acquaintances. It's people who you've known a long time, but you don't have a deep connection to, people you recognize and say hi to at the grocery store. And then the 2nd sphere is with close friends, loved ones, and family. And that sphere, speaks for itself, but those are those like really core connections and people we're maybe already deepest connected to, but also have the opportunity to connect on the deepest level with. And then the 1st sphere of vulnerability is with oneself. That 1st sphere of vulnerability is inside. And the thing about these spheres is that the closer it is to you, the harder it is to be vulnerable. And the further away from you, the easier it is to be vulnerable. So like people, think about that sometimes inversely, like especially like, if you look at what I do in terms of the public vulnerability, and think that would be the hardest thing in the world. Like, I mean, like at this point, estimate is probably like 800,000 people. So like getting pretty close to 1 million people have been reached with my story with like some level of like true depth and understanding. So yeah, let's say 800,000 people have heard or know that I've thought very seriously about killing myself. And like, that sounds like crazy. And that sounds so difficult to hold. And a lot of people, I think, look at that as like courage and bravery, but that 4th sphere, getting that far away from myself, is only possible and it's only successful. And it doesn't come with that level of fear, courage, or desperation, because I started with myself and I worked outwards in those spheres. And that's, I think, the truth for anybody out there. No matter if it's something you're struggling with or if it's just growing as a person, we got to start with ourselves, and we got to start with what's inside, so that we can build a foundation, so that we can connect with other people on a real, genuine level, and so that we can be open and create the space for genuine human connection and vulnerability for others too.
Dude, that's 800,000 people. and starting with just the one with you. Yeah. Sounds like to me, that sounds, what I hear from that is being honest with yourself first and opening up that way.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. And you know, it's not just being honest, it's not just being vulnerable, it's being real. It's like that's where my greatest courage is rooted, is looking myself in the mirror and being honest about where I'm at and being real with myself. And that's what it took to transform myself as a human being. And that's what it takes to, you know, now be able to hold that space.
Well, I think a lot of people really appreciate you holding the space for them through sharing this and being open to talking about it. I know we talked a little bit about some of the challenges of mental health especially in the sports and mountain community. What do you find, or what do you think are some of the big contributing factors specifically in like some of these areas that you're most familiar with? For example, like I noticed, you know, you've also been sober for a few years. One of the sponsors of the film was Best Day Brewing, so like non-alcoholic beer, and keeping that out. And I know that in itself could probably be a conversation around that culture in the ski and mountain community. But what are there any other, like, are there other contributing factors that you think make this a challenging topic for people to approach themselves in mountain communities?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. So what we're speaking about here really is nothing short of a mental health and suicide crisis, not just in America, but in the Rocky Mountain West. And so 7 of the 10 Rocky Mountain states consistently rank in the top 10 highest suicide rates in the country. And that is largely driven by suicide clusters and high suicide rates in mountain towns and in the counties where mountain towns are located. And that oftentimes really surprises people, but this is like not a like 1 year one-off phenomenon. Like this has been very true over like all of like modern data. And there's a lot of different things at play there, like, you know, on like the most basic level. And like if you like have this conversation, just 2 dudes in Chicago, like it'd be like, oh, like, well, like rural suicide rates are always higher than urban suicide rates, which is true. But there's so many different factors going on, and oftentimes with those suicide clusters that are driving these rates, we see them in shoulder seasons between winter and summer in these communities. And that, you know, speaks to like the seasonal and transient nature of these communities. And then also, like, we're living in these wonderful places, but there's kind of a dichotomy going on, because we live these like idyllic dreams, like idyllic dream lives, and we get to recreate and play in the mountains, and we get to live where people vacation, and that is wonderful, and it can be paradise, and like that can, you know, be like as beautiful as we've all imagined. And then like simultaneously, like in the exact same sentence, for the same people, same place, like we can also struggle. But because we've built this culture that celebrates living in paradise and having this like, you know, dream lifestyle, then it can be really difficult to feel like we have the space or we have the validity to also struggle in that same lifestyle, in that same life, in these same places. And then, you know, when we like get into it more, I think a lot of, you know, what we're speaking to, what I speak to, and what people resonate with is that in our communities, we often build a lot of our identities, personally, professionally, as towns, as cultures, around recreation. And those recreation-based identities can put a large and sometimes too large of emphasis on what we're doing out there in the mountains, whether that, you know, in my context is skiing and running, but it could be anything. It could be climbing, mountain biking, whatever. And like those things are wonderful passions and great ways to go experience the outdoors. But if we build an entire culture and identity based off of those, that can be very finite. And again, like, with skiing, like it's literally seasonal. Like we're building an entire identity around what ends up being half of the year or half of our lifetimes. And then on top of all of that, and I think especially true in the ski world, is kind of this good vibes only mentality and culture, where there's really not space to struggle or to show up as yourself if you're not fitting into that good vibes only mindset. And in concert with that is definitely the culture built around partying and drinking that are synonymous with the outdoor community, outdoor recreation. And I think of all sports, I think that's extremely true in skiing, that it feels like, I grew up in a mountain town, and I grew up deep in ski culture. I've been skiing since I was 1.5 years old. And I knew from a very young age, before I had ever tasted alcohol, that kind of the expectation and standard was that every activity, every ski day finished with beers at the tailgate. And when that becomes a huge driving force, again, it's not necessarily that I'm making a baseline statement that like drinking is bad and is driving this culture. It's like, no, like the culture that there's not an option of how to engage with that culture of drinking, or that there's not like it doesn't feel like an acceptable or valid option to not engage, is what's contributing there. So all that's to say, lots of different things are going on in these communities, and the problem is very real. And the reality is that first we need to, like I said, when I'm talking about those fears of vulnerability, is look in the mirror and be honest with ourselves about where we're at. And then we need to address these things. And that's why I do what I do. It's why we're having this conversation, because creating this conversation, creating this safe space, to be honest about the culture that is contributing to a lot of this, is going to create the space for people like me to feel valid in all different experiences, not just that good vibes only experience.
Yeah. Well, I noticed in terms of, I also noticed that UC Health supported the film, and I'd love to hear more about with gaining more awareness around this. So often we think of, I know historically people think of health as, am I fit? Am I eating well? Can I do a 10-minute mile, or can I run 100? What can you tell us a little bit about their involvement with this and how they're wanting to help support this mental health message as well?
Yeah, man. Thanks for asking, because I do think it's like, I don't always love talking about business, and I don't always love talking about the financial side of like things like this, but like what I'm doing is also very unique from a business perspective. Like this film, the three sponsors of it is UC Health, number one, which is Colorado's largest hospital organization, and Mountain Gazette, which is a wonderful publication, but it's very rare and very kind of new for a media company to just sponsor a different piece of media that's not actually part of their company or what they create. And that's because more than anything, Mike Rogie, the owner, publisher, editor, everythinger, believes in this and believes in contributing and giving back to our communities. And then that third sponsor that you already mentioned is Best Day Brewing, which is non-alcoholic beer. And like I said, we're trying to create the option for how people engage in the different elements of our culture in the outdoors and in the mountains. So with UC Health, it was I'll also say I'm quite confident that it's the first skiing film or running film ever sponsored by a hospital organization. And when I realized that, I was like, that's kind of crazy, because I still just feel like I'm a ski bum, like doing all this kind of, on my own, run and gun. And to get a hospital organization to sponsor this is really important, because this isn't, you know, this isn't just a topic, and it isn't just a conversation. It's not just my story. It's really the story of our community, and then ultimately the story of our society. And so to have their backing is huge. And I'd probably be a better ambassador if I remembered the exact dollar figures, but they're putting a massive investment into behavioral healthcare, and especially here in Colorado in rural areas, because they're seeing the problems that we're talking about right now. And so like to get the, you know, vote of confidence like on that side is huge. And I think like proves to the viewers, hopefully, like the like this is this matters, and this is contributing to a cultural and societal shift.
Yeah. No, that stood out to me, because it was surprising to see. Like normally I would think, like I think in Ups and Downs, the main sponsor, it was Solomon, and it was, you know, like other outdoor brands that we're so familiar with, but seeing a health company business getting behind getting this message out there, because it is important to talk about. And I think my perspective, having now watched this a couple of times as well, having watched Feel It All a couple of times as well, is I hope that people that aren't just, it doesn't just reach people and viewers that are potentially struggling with their own mental health issues, but also with people that are maybe in a mentally healthy space who can support others and have a really good understanding, or have a better understanding of what that struggle might feel like. Was kind of one thing that I took away from watching this. I thought, man, I really hope that people see it from that perspective as well, because I think that people that are perhaps in that good space have the space to help others that maybe don't. So have you heard from people that perhaps are in that space? Have you, you know, or what would you individuals might get out of viewing Feel It All as well?
Yeah, it's, you know, the goal of creating this was to like branch out from just the ski community or from the outdoor community, like really into mainstream society. And, you know, that's still the goal, is to keep growing it into that mainstream sphere, because this really, you know, ultimately isn't a story of mental health struggles or healing or personal growth. And it's also not a story of skiing or running. Like really, this is a story of being human, and there are so many different elements that are within that. And because of that, like it is a story that is for everyone. And I think like something that's been really cool is just seeing, you know, like whether it be just little comments or messages here, like, you know, people sharing Instagram stories, like saying like, my friend sent me this, or like, I just watched this, it was really powerful, it connected with me, like you should go watch it. Like that's like how we really create more of a network of safe space for these conversations. It seems like very kind of like casual and mundane, like to, you know, drop a YouTube link in the group chat, but like really like that is what's creating the space and creating these conversations. And like, yeah, there are a lot of people who don't struggle with mental health, have never struggled with mental health, who are watching this film and who are, you know, stoked on it, and also are finding some lessons and resonance by being human. And that, you know, better prepares them and makes them more aware of their loved ones and their friends and their family, so that they can show up for them. And like that's an honor to get to, you know, be that and hold that for people through the film. And I think like yeah, like I said, like trying to break this into mainstream is a lot of the goal here. But like when I say like my story is the story of our community, like what I mean by that, like with like the most basic level is like my story is a microcosm of mountain towns, but like really like mountain towns are the story of the Rocky Mountain West, and the story of the Rocky Mountain West is the story of America as a whole, and the story of America is the story of the world. And so like really that's all it comes down to, is creating human stories for humans to connect with.
Awesome. Well, Drew, thank you so much for taking the time to share. I really, to my last point there, I really do hope that a lot more people check this film out, because it is an important message. I mean, and I know many people throughout my life, not just since moving to the mountains, but throughout my life, that have there has been this culture of like not talking about struggles, mental health, or visiting. I said to you before, like people used to even shy away from saying I'm going to a therapy appointment, and just normalizing the fact that people do struggle with these things. I know on this podcast, we talk a lot about outdoor gear, outdoor adventures, being healthy and getting healthy to stay outside and fit. But I think this is more so an important point to contributing to all of that. So please check out Feel It All. And Drew, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today? Or yeah.
Man, I would just like to say thanks to all the people out there who are helping spread this message. It's pretty shocking, pretty heartwarming to see really how widely this is going. And just thanks for sharing it with people, and thanks for having the hard conversations. And I think like I'm in an extremely privileged position of the people I get to connect with, and the volume and quantity of people I get to connect with. And there, for every person who hears this podcast, who watches my film, who, you know, sees some unhinged Instagram reel I post and just feels a little bit less alone, like there are literally thousands of people messaging me saying the exact same thing, and know that like they are also part of why you're not alone, and know that there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people who don't message me, who are part of all of us not feeling so alone. So yeah, and just pass that on. And like you said, hopefully people who, you know, maybe didn't seek this out but have heard this conversation or see it pop up on their YouTube algorithm, like take the time to open their mind and just connect on a deep level.
Please do. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Michael.